Welcome back, everybody, to the Places We'll Go show with myself and Richie. Lovely to have you with us again. And today we've got a special treat with Jamie Masraff, CEO of Onside. Welcome, Jamie.
Thanks very much, Mark. Great to be here.
Well, it is great to have you. And as we're in the foothills of 2024, I couldn't think of a better guest. I'm just going to do a bit of a trail of your career before we get into it. And it's quite an eclectic backdrop when I checked you out, Jamie. So initially a tax trainee, time as a teacher, as a consultant in corporate finance in public sector. And you've been at Onside for 7 years. And for those who don't know, Onside basically builds and supports a national state-of-the-art youth club network, specifically called Youth Zones, which enable young people to have happy, healthy and active lives. But I think everything you've done is probably practice for this role in the youth sector. And we'll come back to your passion for the youth sector. My, in a nutshell, is Onside is arguably the leader of practice and thought leadership in the youth sector, which has had tough times and continues to have times. So the leading edge of helping to give kids hope and opportunity. You also have a number of board trustee roles. You're also a fellow of the RSA. And at Onside, you're overseeing the biggest growth period to date so far, expanding the network, maintaining the existing network. But ultimately, your business is helping children, young people, have the best possible opportunity in life, giving them skills, employability, well-being and hope. So I think Onside is a very inspiring story. We'll hear more about that. I'm very proud to be a trustee. And you, Jamie, from what I know of you, and I've seen you a fair bit, you're a very deliberate person and very focused, but hold a very balanced perspective. And obviously, and it will come through, extremely passionate about what you're doing. And I know you know that you're hell-bent on doing something significant in the world. So it's an absolute pleasure to have you on. And I know it's going to be a zinger. So thanks for being here.
Wow, what an intro. Thank you very much, Mark. Fabulous.
Well, Jamie, incredible to have you on, as Mark just said. And let's kick off, particularly thinking about what really excites you about this coming year.
That's a great question, particularly the start of 2024. I think this year, for us as a charity on the side, it's a massive year. It's a really massive year, and that excites me personally because of the role that I find myself in Onside. So we are, as Mark mentioned, we set up and support these amazing state-of-the-art youth clubs that we call Youth Zones across in some of the most disadvantaged parts of the country. And there's so little out there for young people right now outside of school. Just a shocking lack of activities, good role models outside of school. And we really want to do something about that. We see that as a critical missing piece in the social infrastructure around our country. And, this year we are developing 8 new youth zones across the country, ranging from Grimsby on the East Coast through to Bristol in the Southwest. And that will take us as a charity from 14 youth zones to 22, reaching 100,000 young people. So it's a really, we want to become this national movement that stands up for young people, particularly in disadvantaged areas. So this year is massive for us as a charity, and therefore for me personally. I've been chief executive on the side for a year, so I kind of still got a little bit the learner ring on, But this year is a chance, I guess, for me to, step up and do what I can in that role to do that for Onside.
Well, we'll hear about how you're leading, and you also mentioned role models, but I think we need to ground ourselves in the gap that is there for youth provision. So just tell us a little bit more about the current state of play in terms of, what is and isn't available for kids up and down the country.
It is. It's a huge gap. Young people spend 85% of their waking hours outside of school. But we focus so much as a society on what happens inside the classroom, and we've basically forgotten about that 85%. And it used to be that in every town around the country, there would be youth clubs, and there would be youth workers, and there would be positive activities for young people to do. And over the last 70 years, but particularly the last 10 years, that's fallen away. We've seen 750 youth clubs close in the last decade, with 4,500 less youth workers. And, for those, and I think one of the issues is not enough people now understand youth clubs and youth work. I think they see it as maybe a bit of a space in the village hall that's set aside for young people to come in on a Thursday night and maybe play table tennis if the bat's not broken and they're able to do something. And that's a problem, because what they're missing is that impact that a youth worker, these amazing individuals who can connect with young people on their level and help them to understand who they are, what they want to be in life, and how to go about doing it. So there's not enough, that we've lost that recognition of those roles. So that's the context that we're working in, a society, I think, that has lost the value of youth work and youth centres, that we need to rebuild, because they're so important right now. We've got, this transformation of the jobs of the future and the economy. We've got young people who are increasingly isolated. Screens are so addictive, aren't they? We're all addicted to them. Young people are no different. We did a survey. We found that 50% of young people spend the majority of their free time in their bedrooms. 3/4 of young people spend the majority of their free time on screens. So you've got this growing, what we call isolated generation, who aren't connecting with their peers, with adult role models in real life. And that's having an effect on their confidence, on their mental health, and their preparedness for the future. So sorry, that's all a bit doom and gloom, but I'm afraid there's no other way to dress that up. This is the situation we're in right now.
Jamie, you've unveiled certainly a curtain in my mind in and around some of the ways in which young people are choosing to live their lives, a consequence partly technology, but also a consequence of as you describe, a changing nature of how we're shifting in society. I wondered if you could maybe elaborate a little bit more, because quite often, and perhaps people listening into this podcast are probably at a stage where they're either considering a career or in a career, but actually we're talking about a population that is slightly more removed from that. And often it's hard to take a glimpse into their lives and understand exactly what they may be going through at a personal level. And I wondered if you have any anecdotes, maybe one or two, where you could describe a circumstance of a young person today that would benefit from some of your youth work.
Well, it's a great, because it is what we do. Is we have 55,000 members now, all of whom have their personal stories, right? And many of whom are struggling with exactly that. And I think what we're trying to give young people is probably a mixture of two things. One is kind of aspiration, hope, right? I think if you live somewhere where you don't think there are jobs for you, and there's going to be decent housing for you, and what's the point? What's the point in engaging? What's the point in trying? But also like a sense of what is possible. Actually, you can't follow footsteps that you don't see. So actually giving them a sense of what's there. So I take, let's take one example of a young guy who's now a youth worker who I love talking about, and I was with him just this week on Monday, Archie. So Archie's an apprentice youth worker now at our youth zone in Barking and Dagenham. And Archie, would say himself, he was struggling at school. And he was struggling at school because home life wasn't great. He felt like, the world didn't understand him, and that may have led to behavior challenges in schools. And as so often happens in schools, when you've got kids who are slightly struggling just to engage, schools struggle to cope with that. So then he was, called up for disruptive behavior. In the end, he was sent away from the school to an alternative education provision. And this is where we tend to send all kids who are struggling to engage at school with any behavioral difficulty. We send them out of mainstream schools. And so Archie, and that could have led Archie to, a very different path. Because then you're only with other kids who have challenging behavior. It's not a great environment. Thankfully, Archie had his local youth club, local youth zone nearby, and he had a youth worker who understood him, and Archie felt who got him and they realized, that Archie, there's some things that Archie loves doing. He loves doing music. He and like that relationship with the youth worker and going to the youth center, that really built his confidence and allowed him to re-engage with school. And through seeing the impact that his youth worker had on him, he wanted to become a youth worker. That inspired him to give him a path. And Archie's one of tens of thousands of young people across the country who, probably are feeling a bit lost right now, because maybe the school system, we've got a very narrow education system, don't we? Unless you're very good at certain disciplines, you're not going to do well at school. So we need to wrap our arms around those type of individuals and give them the support that they need.
Wow, Jamie. I mean, and there's many, many stories like that, I know. And having been in several youth centres, I mean, these are amazing places, doing amazing things, changing lives. And I think there are many people have gone on to do, young people have gone on to do amazing things. So this really matters. I loved your expression, you can't follow footsteps you can't see. So this is important. And so I'm interested to know, what was the genesis of the values that you hold that have led you to this position? So what cultivated you into the values that you have today?
Oh, that's a tough one, isn't it? So of course, I don't really know, right? You never really know why, what kind of shapes you most. I mean, I think I certainly always had a sense of, I don't know, like something about like the whole, it sounds trite, but injustice, right? Societal injustice. The fact of, why do so many opportunities go to so few? That has always driven me crazy. Like, unfairness and injustice, even to the sense of, someone skipping a queue, it drives me bonkers. Right? So there's something that's always been there for me. And I think it probably came, like, I was really fortunate as a kid. Like, I was a scholarship boy in a private school, so surrounded by people who did not think twice about going on endless holidays every year, having the latest shoes and bags and, just having that life. And I didn't have that life, but I was kind of in that world. And I think that probably bred a sense of why do these kids have it so easy in a way, and why do they not realize they have it so easy? And maybe a feeling of not really kind of fitting in, I suppose, probably like creates that slight sense of like, something's not right here. So there was definitely that. I mean, parents, have always had a keen sense of, right and wrong, I guess, in, society. So that's probably pushed on down to me. So yeah, I think that's, when I think back, that's probably the that sense of, it's not fair society, but not that's just the way it is. But actually, there are things we need to do about that.
So many opportunities go to so few people. It really is polarized, and it's only getting more polarized across our land. Jimmy, I think the way that you're describing things, and we talk about the role of aspiration, and in some respects, when you talk about being in that private school, a level of either entitlement that comes from that, from some people there, but a sense of confidence too, I suspect, when they were sitting in that area. It's a fine balance, I think, amongst that sort of population. But what it comes down to a lot of the time is mindset, perhaps. And when I look back at my school career, and I went to a state school out in rural Scotland, it felt like we were not being bred to win. It was almost like we were being bred to kind of, if you do good enough and you have a decent job, then great, you've succeeded. And nothing wrong with that, of course. But I think it's slightly different when I think about perhaps some of my private school contenders who have this tigerishness built into them from the outset. And I wonder, to what extent, or what sort of work do you do in relation to helping young people hone in their positive growth mindsets to both see a new path, but also be able to, as you say, aspirationally recognize that they can achieve it.
I completely agree in the way you described like the difference between the mindset that's developed in private school and state schools, and it's such a powerful force, isn't it? When you've got interview and you've got two people coming to an interview and you've got one who thinks they're God's chosen person to get that job, and the other person who's really hoping to like just to be able to like present a decent impression of themselves. And yeah, so first of all, we think that confidence is infectious. So you gain confidence in one area of your life and it will spread to others. So we're not trying to necessarily to teach young people do a formal qualification or formal set of skills. What we have is various activities. So we've got a music room and a recording studio in our youth zone. We've got some kids who have turned out to be incredible singers and they didn't know it. So they came to the youth zone because their friends were coming and they wanted somewhere to hang out. And they saw this amazing music room and they saw the youth worker there and they went in and they started to sing. And suddenly, one of Owen from Wigan, who ended up singing at the football stadium there, ended up to have a career in the West End. He didn't come to the youth zone because he was into singing, but then through discovering that interest and passion and having it nurtured in a way that sadly so rarely happens, that breeds confidence in that skill. And suddenly you're not just, oh, I'm not sure what I'm good at. I'm good at singing, right? And then, hang on, I must be worth something. I must be, there's something about me. I'm good at singing. That spreads out into all other areas of confidence. And then what we also do, which I think is super important, is when we grow up, we have these like mental barriers, don't we? We all have them, but I think they're particularly the case for young people growing up in some of our poorer parts of the country. And it can be even like physical. I can't leave this town. I wouldn't be able to go into a work environment. Maybe your parents haven't worked. Maybe your parents' parents didn't work. Or I can't hold down a job. So by bringing them into to work environments as part of trips, by getting them to talk to people and about all the different types of jobs there are, by breaking down those mental barriers, that then allows them, with the confidence that they've gained through doing something they're passionate about in their youth zone, that's the way that we try to develop the mindset for that. But it is hard going because these kids who come from, the private schools, they start with such a leg up in that regard. But I will say if I could, just one more thing, which is there is also a power in imposter syndrome, which I think we under index. I think we undervalue. But I think imposter syndrome, which often comes from that, when you make it, if you do make it from that background into the situation, you tend to think, oh, should I be here? But actually it means you never stop trying. And you never stop being hungry and listening to how you might get better, as opposed to many of those kids who grow up thinking they deserve everything that they get, and they're not as open to developing and improving.
Well, that's so powerful. The confidence is infectious and people have to overcome mental barriers. And power of imposter syndrome, it strikes a chord with, we had Oliver Yonchev on last week, another CEO who, similarly has risen up, head and shoulders above his peer group. So at some point, I guess, you have to find something within yourself to back yourself. And so I'm interested, Jamie, at what point did you decide that I wanted to be successful, and to the extent I might even become a CEO? Did you always have that aspiration? How have you backed yourself through your trajectory?
I'm always someone who has suffered from imposter syndrome, doubt, self-doubt, and I'm anxiety is something that workplace anxiety is absolutely something I struggle with day to day, is to overcome that self-doubt. So I've never been someone who's like, I'm going to become a chief executive. This is my career path. Of course, I'm going to be getting that. So it's been, for me, it's I guess just about doing your best in any role you're given. Like, I think it's as simple as that. And then the opportunities, I've been very fortunate. The opportunities have come by not thinking too much around, what's the path? Where am I trying to get to? I did have one big moment where I was kind of a bit lost I had found myself working with local councils, and local councils can be brilliant places. I think they're caricatured as being, full of people who don't care, and that's the opposite of the reality. Loads of people care. The problem is they're working in this massive organization with multiple objectives that are conflicting with each other, different power bases. It's really hard to get anything done. And I was very fortunate that at that time, I'd been doing that for about 2 to 3 years. I suddenly came across this amazing charity, and I had, this idea of charities as being where lots of people talked a good game and didn't really do very much. And that's, a very incorrect caricature. And I met the team from Onside, and they're so driven and so passionate. And I was fortunate at that time. There was an opportunity going, and I took it. But there was never some grand design of, I want to become a chief executive, or, the youth sector is the sector that I'm going to be in, and nothing like that, I'm afraid.
Well, doing your best in every role, I think that's absolutely key. But what's interesting, and maybe joining a few dots here, is as you described, that sometimes, given the context somebody has, could well be a bit of a leg up from other younger people in that sort of area. I'll give you a good example. We ran a marketing competition for young people a number of years ago, and we invited any young person, groups of 3 or 4, to join in and then pitch back to a whole group of chief marketing officers. And what ultimately transpired was we had a set of young people who come from fairly modest backgrounds versus those that you could only categorize from, say, a more privileged background. And what actually happened was not a consequence of talent, but more a consequence of context, where the privileged few had much more time, space, role models, perhaps even resources to actually input into the work, and a whole set of softer skills in and around confidence that they had probably honed in either extracurricularly or at the schools they were at, versus those from modest backgrounds who didn't actually have the time and space because they were working part-time jobs whilst at sixth form college. And so their level of input and context was so different, and yet what transpired at the end of it was the privileged few shone through. And this sort of is very much at the heart of when people go for a job interview, and what you've described is the different context and way out. And I wonder to what extent, how can we change and shape employers' perspectives of recognizing that people come at it from different steps on the ladder when they first get to a job opportunity, and recognize potential over perhaps where they currently are at?
Super question. It is really hard, isn't it? Because it's that's absolutely right, and also it's right to put the onus on the employer rather than the person coming for that job. I heard someone say a great phrase recently, which is, it's not about making young people work ready, it's about making employers young people ready, which I think is really true. We chastise the young generation as being, work shy and struggling, with mental health and these type of things. But actually it's more around what employers need to do for that. And particularly in this regard, I think in terms of recruiting. And I think the whole, the way we base recruitment on interviews and responding to questions they don't know when they're coming, unseen questions, really does favor those that not necessarily talent, but have that veneer of confidence and social ease. But it absolutely does. And I think, that's one thing that, employers should do, is that should be the last almost means you use to assess whether or not someone is prepared. but also like going, I know this is hard for employers, maybe it's playing this guy, but going to where young people are, not interviewing them in, these shiny corporate environments, which might be obviously where work ends up being. But actually, if you want to really understand talent, go to where the talent is and see it in its, where it's comfortable, and for many young people from lower income families, this might be the first time that they've gone into a shiny office building, might be the first time that they've had to wear a suit. And suddenly that is, one of the most uncomfortable experiences that they can get. And it's worth, if you want to find talent, the place to find potential and talent in this country is in the lower income areas of our country. That's the untapped talent that exists. So that's where employers have to go, I think.
So true. And I'm just interested in, before I talked a little bit about backing yourself, and you talked a bit about imposter syndrome, and you have, Jamie, you've got a good heart and a good head, and so you are a CEO, amazing, and doing incredible things. So I'm interested to know sort of, what's it like being a CEO? Maybe people have a caricature. You've got to kind of sell your soul and be something different to who you are. I suspect you'll say the complete opposite, but tell us a bit about what it's like being in the CEO's shoes.
So the first thing to say is nothing like I expected it would be, which is kind of like, so I had real reservations about taking on the role. As Charles, Onside's chair, would say, him and I had quite a few conversations about it where I was saying to him, I'm not sure this is right for me, and particularly because I was worried about how heavy the responsibility would weigh on me. I'm someone who does, I feel responsibility. I feel the weight of that, and I want to do a good job, and that can lead to has led in the past to quite a lot of anxieties. And he gave me some really good advice, which was, you got to be in the game to know how it feels. You can be a spectator on the sidelines looking and imagining how it would feel like, but actually you got to be in the game to really understand it. And he was absolutely right. Because I actually, weirdly, so far, touching wood, I have found it probably less anxiety filled than any role I've ever had, which is really weird. And I think it's because I think with the role has become greater freedom, I guess, to, decide what to focus on. And also not having a direct boss and worrying about whether or not I'm doing a good job, in their eyes, I think is, I have a chair and I have a board. God, Mark, don't think I'm not worried about you, thinking I'm doing a good job, but not quite as direct an interface as you do have with an aligned manager. So I found it really freeing. I found it really liberating. I've really enjoyed it. I think I'm fortunate to be in this period of growth for the charity. I think it might feel quite different if we were in a period where we're really struggling financially and having to make some really tough decisions. At the moment, we're, thankfully in a good place. And I guess, I do feel, I'm fortunate that I've had a range of experiences, and I do think they prepared me reasonably well for this. So in a way, I feel pretty well prepared. I mean, yeah. Not totally, but fairly well prepared for this.
So, CEO, pinnacle of success, some would say. And I often reflect in my own work, what are we actually setting up our young people for? You see, if you look at a lot of the stats, particularly when it comes to the marketing and advertising industry, and I'm sure this is the same across most industries, you would find that people who come from economic disadvantaged backgrounds are, one, typically paid less, two, don't have the same career trajectory as others, experience higher levels of discrimination, and ultimately get more disillusioned and more likely to leave the industry as a whole earlier on. And that then makes me kind of go, well, is that what we're trying to promote as the pinnacle of what someone should try and achieve? when we're pulling them out of one circumstance or helping them to be pulled out of one circumstance, only to find themselves in a whole set of other circumstances, which I'm sure we would all agree are suboptimal for that sort of individual. So in that basis, what are we trying to help set people up for? And what are we helping them to try and achieve?
So I think it's easy to be, and there's so much ample cause, isn't there, to look around and be very depressed and almost nihilistic about, our society and the chances and what's the point of trying anything. And I'm an optimist generally, and I think generally, it's almost a political point at this point in time, but generally being in work is good. I think, not all jobs are as good as other jobs, but not all jobs are created equal. Being in work is good generally for our mental health, for our purpose, sense of identity. I think they're generally good. And I think particularly if you are helped at a young age to discover your passion and your purpose, that will fill you it'll help so much in later life. It will be this kind of, the North Star that guides you through, I think. And my regrets in my earlier career was that I didn't follow my heart. I followed my head too much about, thinking. I remember someone telling me, don't do history at university. What job are you going to get? You do history. You should do like economics, something more useful. And I took their advice, which was stupid. Do what you're interested in, do what you're passionate in, and then things will follow from that, because then with your passion, you will discover where you could, you will take that step. You will, so I think, and that's what we try and do with young people. We try and help them to discover their passion and their purpose. And I do have an optimistic view of with young people armed with that passion and their purpose, they will find, good jobs, a good life, or at least a better job and a better life. And it won't be brilliant every step of the way, but armed with a bit of that passion, that purpose, and that confidence, they'll be able to decide to try something else.
Jamie, I'm going to jump in here for a second. Let me be controversial devil's advocate. So I was listening to Scott Galloway. I'm not sure if you've come across him, big thought leader in our space. He's professor at NYU, but very much a leading light. And perhaps flippantly or with a bit of research backed, he said that often people who say follow your passion and purpose are those that either have already made it, potentially from places and spaces that are not passion at all, but then they have the license to then go out and follow their passions because they're financially free. What would you say to that?
It's a very good rebuttal. But I see through some of our own Youth Zone members, what they've been able to go on to do. And, through having a bit of that passion and purpose. And I don't think it's only the preserve of the privileged, the passion and purpose, because Owen to go on and sing in front of, tens of thousands of people in Wigan Football Stadium, then to go on to become a singer in the West End. He's now become a youth worker, by the way, so he's gone full circle in his career. We've got, Archie and his route through to becoming a youth worker. We've had sports stars that come up through our youth zones. And I've seen too many examples where young people have discovered a path, and I think they're, so yes, I understand that, right? I understand the idea of doing a career change and changing path entirely. It's easier if you have that bedrock of security. But I still think that there are crossroads we all come to throughout our career, regardless of what path we're on. And, I think passion and purpose still should be our guiding light.
Thank you.
As an observer in that little one, that was a good agent provocateur, Richie, and very good response there, Jamie. And I share that view that, in the end, passion and purpose will overcome. I was going to loop back to Owen already, but then you brought him back to the surface again. I had hairs on the back of my neck standing up when you talked about that the first time and a bit the second time as well. We're talking about sliding doors moments in people's lives. And you maybe touched on it a little bit, but what would you say are some of the biggest or the biggest sliding doors moments in your life?
So certainly, I mean, that there was a sliding door moment where I probably it's hard because, I've had the path I've had, and, I cannot complain about the path I've had, but I would go back and I would tell myself to ignore the advice of that well-meaning but misguided adult in my life, telling me to do the thing that, that sounded like a sensible thing to do. I would, because I think, I just think also the way, our careers are, I think it's fine. It's good to do something you're passionate about, basically. So I would have ignored that. That was one sliding door, but who knows where I would have. I might be a historian, or I might be doing something totally different. Who knows? But so that was one moment. But also for me, it was really that point of deciding to make this change to work for a charity and work in the youth sector. I wasn't a youth worker, not a trained youth worker. I had never worked for a charity before, and I'd been working with consultant, or then working in local councils for a good kind of 10 years. And it's, that moment of being like, no, let's go for it. Let's do something totally different. I took it, and again, this is a luxury I could do, and I get that, but I was able to take quite a big, reduction in salary and some change in kind of, in working environment. And it's been the best thing I've done in my career. Really going back to that, something I'm passionate about from something I really wasn't passionate about. Struggling to get up to go to work every day, to being really feeling this is worthwhile, the work. So that was that, being, making that big switch at that point in time. That was 7 years ago. That was a big sliding door moment for me. And I don't know what I'd be doing now if I hadn't done that, really. ...
Right? Whoever knows. But I think it'll come as inspiration for anybody who's perhaps sitting in those shoes at the moment, looking at a sliding door moment and kind of going, you can do this. You can actually make that change and be far more fulfilled as a consequence. It really reminded me of an anecdote I was watching the other day when Jim Carrey was talking about his dad and why Jim Carrey got into being a comedian and an actor. And it was a consequence of his dad having a very unfulfilled life in professional services and doing so because he felt that was the route to security for his family. And ultimately, Jim was talking about that his dad ended up in failure and redundancy. And then his recognition was, actually, the safe route is not actually the safe route either. So you might as well do something that you absolutely love and you will be fulfilled by, because actually you don't know what's around the next corner for anybody, no matter what route you try and change and choose. So there we are. Jamie, this has been such an incredible session here. And we've approached perhaps the end of the segment. So let me pitch out just the last question. You speak to young people each and every day. What would you say is your hope and your aspiration for the youth of tomorrow in the UK?
My hope and aspiration is that young people are given a fair shot. It's as simple as that. Right? We've got so much potential. It's untapped in our country. And we've got an economy and employers who are crying out for that talent. Really. And yet, we're not giving young people a fair shot because we're not preparing them for that world. We're not preparing them to be work or world ready. So my hope is that we as a society, we really recognize that untapped potential that exists and do so much more to to support young people, and not just inside the school gates, but helping them in that 85% of their waking hours spent outside of school.
Wow. Thank you, Jamie. That's a wonderful way to end, giving our youth a fair shot and helping them to really understand the potential that they have, and giving them the impetus to really tap into those, their untapped potential, as it were. So I get the pleasure now of just perhaps pulling out some of the key themes from this session here, which has been truly incredible and so much to go after. But of course, you just ended off when you described that 85% of a young person's working hours is spent outside of school. And actually the reality is most of the impetus and emphasis is given during school hours, and yet, the vast majority of the time is spent elsewhere. And we actually probably have what's close to an epidemic here in relation to how young people from deprived areas spend their time outside of the classroom, particularly as we've seen a whole host of places and spaces and clubs and communities closing down over the last decade. But what you touched on was beyond the broken table tennis rackets, was the link between the relationship between a young person and a youth worker who was able to genuinely show a young person a different path. And that illustration, an example of Archie, is probably no better example, where they actually get perhaps ostracized from mainstream education and needing to go into other sort of forms of education and then feeling really lost. And had it not been for the work that Onside does, he may never have found his way. And that young person and that youth worker pretty much saved him and got him back into where he is. And now, of course, today he's then doing it himself, which is just absolutely incredible. You talked about your value system, and you say that it stems from the fact that one, you were a scholarship boy, that you went to a private school, and a sense of wanting to right the wrong, a sense of being able to overcome injustice. So many opportunities just go to so few. And part of the answer to that is a mindset shift. So confidence is infectious. And what you do at Onside is all in and around try to breed a level of confidence, but then instilling that confidence and working towards breaking down of barriers, both physical and mental as well. I find it amazing that you say that you have and you've suffered from imposter syndrome. Doesn't show, Jamie. So there you go. You covered it out well. Maybe you've either overcome it or just known how to hide it better. But hey, and we talked a bit about employers and the responsibility that employers actually have today to really get their recruitment processes right and recognize to meet the talent where they are, even going out of their own comfort zones to go into find untapped talent in and around the country where they may be. Recognizing that sometimes young people may wear a suit for the first time, maybe going into a shiny building for the first time. And that actually does require a real sense of empathy when actually looking at a talent pool. We talked about CEO land and you being the forever optimist. And I do too believe that actually being work is good. It's for the greater good of both yourself as well as society. Of course, passion and purpose, North Star, and perhaps you would have been that historian. Who knows where you'd be? But I think you're better off for many of us here today that you'd followed this path, despite perhaps what you've decided about ignoring advice. I'm glad that you're here. And finally, you talked about the need and desire to help our young people have a fair shot, a fair crack. And I think that's really inspiring and one that I hope we can all help now and maybe open doors for that next generation coming through. So I hope I've done you justice here, Jamie. Thank you so much for your time. It's been truly inspiring and I've learned so much. And it's just a pleasure. And I just want to really wish you all the best for 2024. It seems like a super, super exciting year of growth and expansion, and all for the benefit of the young people of this country. So thank you.
Thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure.